Sean know how to do it, but we ask your name and just the year you were born, not your date and all that stuff. Because we just,
Go ahead. He already asked.
Yeah, I'm Robert M. Redfear Sr., born 1946 in Iredell County, Mooresville, North Carolina.
When you was growing up in Mooresville, are there some things that you just remember that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, there's a lot that I can recall. Being a child coming up in Mooresville, it was pretty much like any other small town. But Mooresville, they kept a lot of things under wraps, I would say undercover. They smoothed over, might be for the lack of a better word. In other words, they would pretend to be the first to evolve into equality, being equal, but beneath it. And anybody that lived in Mooresville knew that back from the 50s, I can recall from the 50s up, where the Klan was active. There was no protection from the authorities, because some of the authorities were involved in Klan activity. And the thing that we were told was to stay in your place. But me being as hard-headed as I was and headstrong, I wanted to try to find where my place was. And for some reason, down inside me, I knew that it wasn't my place to be ruled as a second class or second choice. You know, we were treated like ex-slaves, what they called us, second class citizens. But I felt somewhere down inside me there was something better than that in me. And with a lot of the others that came up along with me, we were what they would call then rebellious. There were times when you wasn't allowed to walk Main Street after dark. You could cross it, but you couldn't walk on it. If you did, then you were harassed by the police. And, I mean, the N-word, it was slung around like donuts. Where you going? Why are you up here? Where you headed? Where did you come from? I mean, all of these questions, but then we could see the white kids could go, they had the leisure to go anywhere they wanted to go, anytime they wanted to go, and do anything they wanted to do. But with us, it would be criminalized. You know, we were treated as criminals if we were out after dark, especially if it was more than one or two of us. But then our parents would, they would just about plead with us to stay off the street because it was dangerous. We didn't know what the dangers were. We knew that there was called a Klan, that they would do all of these things to blacks if they caught them, but it just didn't register that it was that kind of danger lurking. But they knew because they had experienced it. And in school, we had teachers that were there for a job, mainly. Your education didn't mean a whole lot to them. They were sent from other areas. I recall one from Winston-Salem, there was one from Durham, and then there was one from Greensboro. They showed up every day to make a paycheck. They would run through some things. If you got it, you got it. If you didn't, pass you on anyway, just to get you out of the school and bring some others in. They were there mainly for that monthly check. These are the things that I experienced coming up in Mooresville as a child, back in the day, as they call it. Were all white people that mean, nasty? No. There were some that were interested in you getting an education. There were some interested in you being a viable citizen You know, there were some that would even go as far as to help you as far as they could. They couldn't go but so far because they had to live there too. And after school, most all of the people, the guys and the girls my age, they would leave Mooresville because they said there was nothing in Mooresville for them. Some would go no further than Charlotte, but they would leave Mooresville because Mooresville was a little bit slow in help. They could go to Charlotte and get better help. Or they could leave and go to Winston, Greensboro, Durham and get better help. Mooresville was a little bit slow in helping the blacks. They mainly wanted the blacks in the kitchen and black women in the kitchen, and they wanted the black men in their yards. When they started opening up the cotton mills for the blacks, the jobs they got were cleaning those spittoons, sweeping. None of the jobs that paid a good salary were given until they found out that the cotton was giving them what they call the black lung. The cotton was bad for their health, so they began to come out of the cotton mill and they started putting blacks on those jobs. And the blacks was taking the job because the pay was good, not realizing that it was dangerous to their health. But then Duke Power come along and took a lot of them out of the cotton mills. They left the cotton mills from the cotton dust getting in their lungs and went into this radiation. And we've had many blacks to die from that radiation exposure. But the thing that bothers me today about that is they knew. They knew that in time it would take its toll, and the majority of them were black. They had already set aside money for the suit for those that would come down with these different ailments from that radiation. And anybody in Mooresville, my age or maybe 10 years younger, know most of the people that were exposed to this thing. Mooresville, I love Mooresville as my home. This is where I was born. I love the landscape. You know, I love the place. But it was the treatment that you got being there caused most of the blacks to just leave. And most of them are still gone. Some of their children came back and they left again because Mooresville still has not came up to par. In my evaluation, they have not came up to par yet. There's still a lot of separation in Mooresville. There's still a lot of discrimination. Jim Crow is not dead. He's just laying dormant. He's alive and well. And he waits for his turn or waits for the opportunity to rear his ugly head and cause a whole lot of dissension.
Can I stop you for a minute? Mm-hmm. The way your parents came up, and then it was time for you to come up, their world was different versus yours. Why do you think that they emphasized the things that they emphasized to you when they did at the time that they did?
Because of fear. Fear tactics is what they use against you. As long as they can keep you fearful, they can keep you in control. And our parents had experienced, they had seen firsthand some of the things that could happen to you if you go out and not stay in what they said your place. If you did go out and you rebel against what you felt like was unfair, ill treatment, if you resisted them then you were in a greater danger, because they would find ways of getting rid of you. If you didn't meet some accident, you would meet the judge and wind up with lengthy terms in prison for mediocre offenses. I had experienced firsthand. My brother was at one of the functions on Main Street one night. And him and one of his classmates got into a little skirmish, and this police officer came up and got between them, and they had the place roped off. He took a rope, loose from the pole, and struck my brother in the face with it. And he told the white boy, "Go home, I have your daddy to deal with you. You going to jail." And that's when I intervened. I said, "No, it's not." He said, "Well, who are you?" I said, "That's my brother." I said, "And you're not going to send that boy home and send my brother to jail when they both were guilty of the same thing." And it broke out into a big thing that night. But of course, the next morning, they had wasn't about 4 police cars in Mooresville, but they were all in front of my house the next morning to carry me uptown to tell me what all could happen to me. And I said, "Well, I mean, it's your choice. You do it. Whatever it is you want to do it." But after talking to some other people that knew me and knew some of my people, they came to an agreement to let me go with a warning. Don't do that again. If you feel like you've been done wrong, go to a higher authority. Well, who was the higher authority? The same ones that incriminated me to begin with.
I have a question. Back then, you can keep looking at them. Back then, you were known as Preacher Mike, and back then you were preaching, but it was a different type of preaching. But you just had that aimless spirit inside of you that you fought against injustice.
Of course. I was one that never liked being controlled. I rebelled against my parents because I didn't want to be controlled by them. They were my livelihood. So I wasn't about to be controlled by somebody that had not my best interests. So I rebelled against them. And the time that I became Preacher Mike, or the time I became their disc jockey, I was usable. Because by then, a lot of the blacks in Mooresville, they trusted me, they trusted my judgment. They believed in me. So they knew then if we get our hands on him, again, this is that thing of being brainwashed to brainwash the others. If we get our hands on him, we can have him help us keep the rest under control. But that wouldn't be the case. I was there for the money. First of all, the fame came, and then enjoying the fame of being Preacher Mike, the disco juice shooter, as they called it. I started doing their radio advertisement, and there were a couple of them that just about owned Main Street. And one asked me to go to some of the other merchants on Main Street and ask them to let me do advertisement for them on my broadcast. And they said, if they say no, then we'll go up on their rent. I said, okay. I mean, again, this is pulling one sea crab out of the bucket so the rest can follow. And at the time, I failed for a lot of it at the time because, I had like a 10th grade education. but I had a whole lot of wisdom because I catered to the elders. They was my guide. They were my leaders. They were the ones that instilled in me the right and the wrong, and what it would be like if I was to go out and betray the rest of the people, what you'd be called, what you'd have to live with. And that didn't bother me. So in a lot of areas, I was the only black that some of the whites would even deal with. And that was not the best thing for me. In a lot of areas, they went against me in my own neighborhood, because they would say, well, why you? You know, what are you giving them? You know, are you telling them everything that's going on in the neighborhood? Or are you feeding us to the dogs? And no, I'm not. You know, and I wasn't. What went on in my neighborhood stayed in my neighborhood. And I wasn't about to take it out of my neighborhood and share it with anybody. You know, I was accused of it, but then even the police would say they really don't know you, do they? Because they had already tried picking my brain. You know, who's selling moonshine whiskey? Who's doing this or who's doing that in your neighborhood? That's your job to find out. I'm not a police officer, you are. And I was called all kind of names for that, but I lived through it. And just being who I was at that time, I think, kind of saved me. Because there was a lot of others, Curtis, you know, that didn't make it. They departed this life at an early age. But I thank God for the power of prayer, being covered by prayer, by my mother, my grandmother. That's what saved me from being from worse things. I did time in prison, yeah. But my thing on me being incarcerated, I don't look at it as being arrested. I look at it as being rescued, because a whole lot worse could have happened to me if I had been there at the time it was happening to others. So that time that I spent behind bars was in a lot of ways the best thing that happened to me, because I learned a lot from a lot of educated people. Some of the smartest people in the world are incarcerated. And if you'll listen, if you'll take the time to listen and evaluate, then you can use all of these little nuggets that they throw out at you. You can use all of these things to better your own life. And that's when I came back into Mooresville. It's when I had the ability to go out and lead a march, to get the people together and lead as Curtis was in the march. You know, it wasn't about looting, it wasn't about rioting, it was about showing that we had a concern for the leader that they had snuffed out.
All right, let me stop you for a second. Couple sparked that in you, and how did you begin to organize what you did in Mooresville?
Well, excuse me. I had been to a lot of meetings, which I never joined, but I've been to a lot of meetings, and I had heard a lot of interesting things that the civil rights movement was bringing about for blacks. And again, being incarcerated, there were people in there that were involved in the civil rights movement that would share different things about the movement and what the movement was about, what Dr. King was about, and how that every black should get behind him, and because he's going to bring forth a new day. It's going to be a different day for the black man because of Dr. King. when I got out of prison and came back into Mooresville, and I was in Virginia at the time, but I came back into Mooresville, I had a little bit of knowledge about the civil rights movement. I had a little concern about how it was going to affect my children, the next generation. I knew what had happened to me as a child coming up. We didn't have those protections. Dr. King came about trying to bring about, he was bringing about that protection that we needed and didn't have. But he was bringing it about for the generation then and the generation to come. So at his death, I felt like we should let them know that we are interested in the Dr. King movement. And we're not going to go up here and riot. We're not going to go up here and loot. We're not going to cause a whole lot of violence. But we're going to start on one end of Mooresville, and we're going to march to the other singing, "We Shall Overcome." And that's what we done. I remember police cars being about every intersection, which wouldn't have been but 5 or 6 because they didn't have too many cars. But they would be there with riot gear on, helmets, and we were just marching down the street singing, "We Shall Overcome." There was no windows broken, there was no fires lit, there was no looting done. We went about the thing that Dr. King was about, and that was bring about a peaceful revolution.
How did the black people in Mooresville feel about you trying to organize that?
Most of them were fearful because they were afraid that it would bring out the opposition, the racist people. And the ones that were there that night that we organized and we marched was pretty much the ones that stayed in that mood. It was hard bringing some of the rest out. But over the years, people like Terry Graham and Norris Graham and some of the others that were civil rights activists, they could reach people that we couldn't reach, and by them reaching the older people, that would cause them to release some of the other younger people to come out.
One thing that I'm kind of getting, and I could be wrong, I don't know, I ain't always right, but it seems like they really didn't emphasize the teachings of King in this area.
Not to a great extent. Not to a great extent. I would say it was a mixture. Some were about a peaceful resolution. Then there were others that was following other activists like Malcolm X and this other group that sprung up, H. Rap Brown and all of those. They said, well, how in the world can you go and let somebody bust you upside your head, with bottles and bricks and clubs, and you say it's all right, we shall overcome. It was just that mentality, that what do they call it? Militant. We had the militant mentality, and then we had the King mentality. It was up to you to choose. The ones that had the militant forces, they were the ones that mainly went down, wound up in prison, were actually targeted. It wasn't that many people, well, I won't say that many, I didn't see any people that were following the King movement targeted. They wasn't really, what should I say, they wasn't really accepted by a lot of white society, but they were better accepted than they were the militants. Because the militants, they really feared walking the street with their fist balled up saying Black Power. They were fearful of that.
So, how did the white people receive you organizing this movement? And how did your relationship with people change before you organized the movement or the march and after?
Well, after we marched that night, chief of police, the mayor at the time came to my house and asked me if I would be willing to go to the center on West End and organize another meeting, telling the people how well we have been getting along, how we didn't need marching and we didn't need the things that would involve blacks getting together to separate us from them, which it wouldn't be a separation from them. It was just letting them know that we know that we're not being treated equal, and that we need more participation in killing some of these Jim Crow laws than anything else. But then I had some people from the black side criticize. They call it a weakness. You'd be surprised at how many people during that time thought that King was weak because he wanted to bring about a peaceful resolution. They listened to Malcolm X saying that there is no such thing as a peaceful revolution. Revolution means war, bloodshed. But King proved to him that there is a such thing as a peaceful revolution, and that is nonviolent. And it worked better than the violent revolution.
How do you feel knowing that you organized this march for the town? What happened next, race-wise, within Mooresville?
Can I, before you answer that, say that again, because it was something that I wanted to say that again, because it was a little piece in there that I was going to say by him organizing the march for the town of Mooresville. But then another thing could be added in there, that there's no evidence of the march ever happening in history with Mooresville. Where did that? You see what I'm saying? What I'm trying to say?
The newspapers
Because,
didn't
the
cover it.
newspaper didn't cover anything.
That's fine. That's why we're making this right here.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the newspapers never covered it, but like I said, I had a visitation from the Mooresville police chief and the mayor. And most of the people that would know about that meeting, because I had met with several others afterwards, they're mostly all dead. And if there's any of them still alive, I wouldn't know where to find them. But they knew what had transpired on that night, and they knew who it was that headed up that march. And it was Mike Redfear and Lamont Houston. And it all started on West End down at Jim Frank's Cafe. We were all standing out there talking about, the situation we had in Mooresville and how it was that Dr. King was bringing about a solution to the problem that we were having. And you know how it is when you get started brainstorming. One person has an idea, then somebody else comes in and makes that idea bigger, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and then everybody begins to come on one accord. And we came up with the solution that we need to let these people know that we're not all right with King's death. We need to let them know that we know that it was about to become, it was bringing forth a peaceful revolution, a peaceful resolution, even in our little town. But now there's a doubt that it would happen because the leader is gone. But thank God he wasn't like Joseph in Goshen. he had leaders up under him. He had people that would come behind him to carry on the movement.
But you know, that particular, that
Well, for the most part, most of the people that I knew, it's just like it all flew apart because it was hard to keep the people together with all of these other groups coming up that was opposed to King, just the opposite. They were just the opposite of what King was or what King wanted. And we just dispersed. But that didn't stop the movement in Mooresville because, like I said, we had people like Terry Graham, and Norris Graham, and the fronters, June fronters, Robert Bowers. They were people that were entrepreneurs that they had the opportunity to meet the public, to meet more people every day. They kept it going. They were because they were Robert Bowers and June fronters. They were even in the march, and they would keep the conversation going. Like that night we marched, we went out to let the people know that we are saddened over King's death and that we will not take this sitting down. Although there was no rioting, there was no looting, and there was no violence at all. But we made a statement by that march saying we shall overcome. And that was King's theme, we shall overcome. And that theme is still going today. And things are still getting better because of him.
one other thing I just want to add, I'll let you say it if you're familiar, but during that time in Mooresville, we had the NAACP, and so that was like a healer to some of us that was old enough to join. And at that, right after King's death, the NAACP really started taking on members, and they really started growing in this area as well.
So that leads me to the next thing that I was getting ready to throw at you. So those people that organized the movement, those people that organized the march, some of those became the next group of leaders, the next generation of leaders, because you guys were young. Can you talk about how some of these people became the next generation of leaders after that march?
Yeah, because they never quit. I quit. It's not something that I'm proud of, but I quit. But they didn't. And like I said, they were barbers and taxi cab drivers. They met a lot of people daily, on a daily basis. And not only did...
So don't say they, say their names. Say their names.
Terry Graham, Robert Bowers, June fronters. They were barbers and taxi drivers. Norris Graham. They had the opportunity to reach more people. They had daily contact with people. And not only that, they began to bring in more and more white people into the movement that would break loose from the, what should I call it, the fear of being called in-lover, and a lot of other names that they call it.
So is it safe to say the Mooresville that we see now that has more inclusion was a result of those guys marching, continuing to fight, and continuing to motivate people?
Keeping the dream alive.
And how did you view it? How did that make you feel? Because you was one of the people that helped spark that idea.
Well, I can feel good about the part that we played in it that night. I can look back on it, and I can see where my parents and a lot of other parents were concerned that we could have been wiped out like a lot of the blacks are being wiped out today, but they didn't take it to that extent then. But this is what they feared. This is what our parents feared would happen to us. But thank God none of that happened to us. But I can look back on that time and feel good about the part that I played in it. I was called a lot of things. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but I've never been called the good guy that went out that night and helped organize a march to show our love and our concern and our appreciation for Dr. King.
And you mentioned that you went to prison. Did you ever come back to Mooresville and do anything that was meaningful other than organize the march?
Well, actually, I had already been in prison when I organized the march, when I helped organize the march. And I left again and went back to Virginia, but when I came back, I come back as a minister of the gospel. And my quest now is to try and draw as many people as I can to the kingdom of God, which I believe walks hand in hand with the civil rights movement.
And how did your experiences prepare you for what you do right now?
Knowing that I'll be able to do it. The people that were behind me that night, they gave me a sense of assurance that I wasn't standing alone. So I do believe now that if I was to go out there now and head up a movement, I would get just as many people, if not more, to follow, because I have proven myself to be who I say I am. And I'm not taken down. And my theme is I will not let up, back up, or shut up until I'm taken up.
The oil that used to go down on the streets. So I'm gonna ask you a question. In your neighborhood, which was West End, and I always say that West End to me there's a difference between a community and a community and a difference between a community and a neighborhood. Because a neighborhood, community is where you got businesses, black businesses, church, school, all that stuff that make a community. You got to have all that in there. Well, West End was a community, But what was some of the things that you remember about West End, the streets, the smoke truck, some of the Mr. Lewis stop, some of them people, Matt Craig, anybody, just some of them people that you knew. Just talk about what you experienced there on West End growing up. Some of the things that you've seen.
Well, in reference to that fog truck, I learned that it was DDT, that they were spraying and made a big fog. We'd hear it coming, and we'd all run and get behind it, and we'd be running up in that smog, and they knew that it was DDT. But nobody ever said, get out of that smog, man, that stuff is dangerous, it'll kill you, it will give you lung disease, I mean, it can cause all different types of ailments in your body. That was never said, And they knew that we'd be sitting on the side of the road in the ditch waiting on that truck. When it started spraying that DDT, we were running right in behind it. And as far as the roads, we was on dirt roads. And people would complain about the dust. We need paved roads. You got paved roads all over Mooresville, but in the black neighborhood, there's no paved roads. So they come in there with spray, burn oil on the road to keep the dust down. The Environmental Protective Agency stopped that. It wasn't nothing to do with them caring about our health or well-being. It was about the underground well being contaminated with these oils, these burnt oils and so forth. And what was that other question?
Right, Mr. Revale.
It was where you come to get your hair cut. We had the barbershop, we had the cafes. We had 2 cafes and 2 barbershops on West End. And everybody that comes to Mooresville came to West End. Eastern Hike, they call it, on Barbershop Street, which was Allison's Grill, another one of the night spots. And these were the places that, as children, we just couldn't stay away from because of all of the excitement, fighting. It reminds you of the old saloon days in the western towns. It's every weekend, somewhere around before midnight, there's always a fight break out. And the police would come and they would set up on what they called the back street. They would sit up there with their lights out and watch. There were people getting busted in the head with bricks and 2x4s, getting their face slashed, their throat slashed, and they would just sit there. I mean, this is about how much they cared about what happened in these black neighborhoods. And once they watched enough, they would crank up and they'd leave.
Remember my Uncle Levy. Wait for my uncle and go ahead.
Yeah, they were fighting over this lady that lives on West End.
What were their names again? Go ahead, just tell
It
me.
was Levy Jr. and Richard Meekins. Richard Meekins was from Mississippi. He came up here when they was building a bridge, the Catawba River Bridge that connects Catawba and Iredell County. And he was living at the cafe. Me and Jim Carr rented out rooms there for those guys from Mississippi. And these guys got to arguing over this lady. And it was even the next week, in about the middle of the week, when there was no partying going on. They started arguing. Levy came out with the big old, I don't know what kind of knife it was. It looked more like a Bowie knife. And Richard Meekins came out from the back of the cafe with a butcher knife. And they went to each other. Richard Meekins, I remember standing on my grandmother's porch. I seen him right back and he stabbed Levy in the chest, and I think it punctured one of his lungs. But Levy started slicing. They carried Richard away in an ambulance. Levy walked down the street. He'd been stabbed in the chest twice. He's sitting in the side ditch, waiting for the ambulance to come back. But in the meantime, the Mooresville Tribune came and took pictures of him sitting in that ditch bleeding. But miraculously, both of them lived.
They stood there and had a cutout.
So, person that owned it, Mr. Moten, he's still alive. I'm going to talk to him sometime soon. So, tell us about the Friendly Barbershop.
Well, I don't recall Mr. Moten. I don't remember much about him. But I remember he rented it out to June Frontis, and June Frontis brought in Robert Bowles. And no, that wasn't Moten. That was Pfeiffer. He rented it to him. Moten had the one on West End down on West McClellan. Can't think of the guy's name that he put in there. But I remember him having June in there. June was cutting hair on his back porch. And they were charging us 15 cents a head. It was 20 cents if you had got a razor line. And the Motens, when they opened the barbershop, they knew that everybody went to June Frontis on Saturday morning at his house and sat on the back porch to get a haircut. So he saw where it would be beneficial if I bring this man into my barbershop. He got all the business over there, and and that's where people going. That's what they been. This is what they used to. This is who been cutting their hair. So he brought him in, and when he brought him in, he was cutting hair and they were doing a lucrative business. I forget now which one it was that came into town and opened the barbershop, but he sent the authorities over there because June didn't have a license. So June had to come out of the barbershop and go get a license. But the whole time he was going to school, he was working on an apprenticeship. So he didn't lose but about a day in the barbershop. See, and this is that kind of cutthroat thing that we had going on in the black neighborhood. If you was getting more business, then they would find a way, find some dirt on you to try and undercut you to get the business. And then the one that did the undercutting couldn't handle the business.
Yeah.
And I was the first black to be hired by Mooresville Electric. And as of, I think, about 10 years ago maybe, they still had me in their system. But after I left, there was a host of blacks came through Mooresville Electric that's been licensed and become electricians. Hubert McCorkle and the McCorkle family, George Hopper, all those guys came in behind me. But I broke the ice. I was the first one they would hire.